Once upon a time, in a small village surrounded by thick forests and singing birds, there lived a beautiful young woman named Maku. Maku was admired by everyone for her kind heart and glowing smile. She was hardworking and spent her days helping her family. One day, a handsome and wealthy man named Aola came to the village. Aola was different from the other men Maku knew. He wore clothes that sparkled in the sun, and his voice was as smooth as honey. Aola fell in love with Maku at first sight, and soon after, he asked her to be his wife. Maku was hesitant at first. She didn't know much about Aola, but he promised her a life filled with happiness, riches, and everything she could ever dream of. He told her she would never have to worry about anything again. Maku's parents, who wanted the best for their daughter, encouraged her to marry Aola, and so she did. When Maku moved to Aola's grand house, she was amazed. The house was huge, with shiny floors and rooms filled with golden decorations. Aola gave her beautiful dresses, jewelry that sparkled like stars, and servants to help her with everything. He treated her with love and kindness, always making sure she was happy. Aola had a best friend named Aribo. Aribo often visited the house and spent time with Aola and Maku. He was quiet and polite, always smiling but rarely speaking. Aola trusted Aribo deeply and told Maku that Aribo had been his friend for many years. Maku liked Aribo too. He was respectful and always brought gifts whenever he came over. Months turned into years, and Maku thought she had the perfect life. But strange things began to happen. One evening, while Aola was out, Maku decided to explore the house. She had never gone into a certain room upstairs, which Aola had told her was his private study. Curiosity got the better of her, and she tiptoed inside. The room was filled with books and strange objects she had never seen before. In the corner of the room was a locked box. Maku felt her heart race. She knew she shouldn't open it, but something told her she needed to. She searched for the key and found it hidden under a rug. When she opened the box, her eyes widened in shock. Inside were letters and pictures of Aola and Aribo, smiling together in ways that made Maku's stomach churn. Confused and frightened, Maku quickly closed the box and put it back. She decided not to tell Aola what she had found, but from that day, she started paying closer attention to everything around her. One night, she pretended to be asleep when Aola and Aribo were talking in the living room. Their voices were low, but Maku heard enough to know that Aribo was more than just a friend to Aola. She also heard something that made her blood run cold. Aribo mentioned a sacrifice and a snake. Maku didn't understand what it all meant, but she knew one thing for sure: her life was not as perfect as it seemed. What was Aola hiding? What did Aribo mean by sacrifice and snake? Maku's heart was heavy with questions, but she knew she had to find the answers without letting anyone know she was suspicious. Maku couldn't sleep that night. Her thoughts raced like the wind in a storm. She kept hearing Aribo's voice in her head: the snake must be kept happy. What snake? What sacrifice? She tried to think, but the more she thought, the more her heart pounded in fear. The next day, Aola was unusually cheerful. He brought Maku a new necklace, one that shimmered with green stones like the scales of a snake. "Do you like it?" he asked, his smile wide and warm. Maku forced herself to smile back. "It's beautiful," she said, though the necklace made her feel uneasy. She couldn't shake the image of the strange objects in Aola's study and the words she had overheard. That afternoon, Aribo came to visit again. This time, Maku watched him closely. He was calm as always, but something about him felt different now. His smile seemed less friendly, and his silence felt heavy, like he was hiding something. While Aola and Aribo were talking, Maku excused herself and went outside to the garden. She needed fresh air to clear her mind. But even in the garden, she couldn't escape the feeling that someone or something was watching her. Suddenly, she heard a soft hissing sound. She turned quickly, her heart pounding. At first, she saw nothing. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something moving in the bushes. A long, shiny shape slithered away, disappearing into the shadows. Maku froze. Was that a snake? She ran back into the house, her breath quick and shallow. She didn't tell Aola what she had seen. She wasn't sure why, but something inside her told her not to. Instead, she went to the kitchen and found the head servant, an older woman named Beezy. Beezy, Maku whispered, "Have you ever seen a snake in the garden?" Beezy looked at her with wide eyes. "Madam, you should not speak of such things," she said, her voice low and nervous. "Why not?" Maku asked, her voice trembling. "The master does not like us to talk about the snake," Beezy replied, glancing around as if someone might be listening. Before Maku could ask more, Aola called for her. She quickly left the kitchen, but her mind was swirling with questions. Why was everyone so afraid of the snake? What was its connection to Aola and Aribo? That night, Maku decided to stay awake and keep watch. She pretended to sleep while Aola lay beside her. When she was sure he was asleep, she quietly got out of bed and tiptoed to the study. This time, she searched more carefully. She found strange books with drawings of snakes and rituals. One of the books had a page titled The Keeper of Fortune. Maku's hands trembled as she read the words. To hold wealth and power, the keeper must feed the snake. The bond is unbreakable. Betrayal will awaken the snake's wrath. Maku's heart raced. She didn't understand everything, but it was clear that Aola's riches were connected to this mysterious snake. And Aribo? Was he part of this too? Suddenly, she heard footsteps. Her heart sank. She quickly put the book back and hid behind a large chair. The door creaked open, and Aola stepped in, followed by Aribo. "She's starting to ask questions," Aribo said in a low voice. "Don't worry," Aola replied. "She won't find out the truth." "Not yet." Maku held her breath, her body trembling. What truth? What were they hiding? Maku crouched behind the chair, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it. She dared not move or breathe too heavily. The dim light from the study's single lantern cast shadows on the walls, making the room feel even more eerie. Aribo paced slowly, his voice calm but firm. "Aola, you know the snake doesn't like delays. We have to keep things in order. The last offering wasn't enough." Aola sighed deeply. "I know, Aribo, but I need more time. Maku is starting to notice things, and I can't have her getting suspicious. If she finds out..." He didn't finish his sentence, but his tone was heavy with worry. Aribo stopped pacing and leaned against the desk. "If she finds out, Aola, it won't just be you who pays. You know the snake's rules. Betrayal will bring destruction on all of us." Aola nodded slowly, rubbing his temples. "I'll handle it. Just give me a little more time." "She trusts me." From her hiding spot, Maku clenched her fists. Trust? How could she trust him now, after everything she had overheard? She wanted to jump out and confront him, to demand answers, but she knew that wouldn't be wise. She had to stay calm and think of a way to uncover the truth without putting herself in danger. Aribo walked toward the door, pausing for a moment. "Remember, Aola," he said quietly, "if the snake is not pleased, it will take what it's owed, one way or another." Then he left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Aola stood there for a moment, staring at the desk, before turning off the lantern and leaving the room as well. Maku waited until she was sure he was gone before slipping out of her hiding spot. Her knees felt weak, but her mind was racing. She needed help, but who could she trust? Beezy had seemed frightened earlier, but maybe she knew more than she let on. Maku decided to speak with her first thing in the morning. The next day, Maku found Beezy in the kitchen, peeling yams for breakfast. She glanced around to make sure no one else was nearby before sitting down beside her. "Beezy," Maku whispered, "I need to know the truth. What is the snake? And why does Aola keep secrets about it?" Beezy froze, her hands trembling. "Madam, please," she said in a hushed voice. "It's dangerous to talk about such things. If the master finds out..." "He won't find out," Maku interrupted firmly. "I just need to understand. Please, Beezy, I need your help." Beezy looked into Maku's eyes and saw her desperation. She sighed deeply, setting the yam down. "The snake is not just an ordinary animal," she began. It is a spirit, a guardian of wealth and power. Your husband and Aribo made a pact with it long before you came into their lives. The snake gives them everything, the riches, the success, but it demands loyalty and offerings in return. Maku felt her blood run cold. Offerings? She asked. Beezy nodded grimly. Yes. Sacrifices. Things or people the snake desires. If the offerings stop, the snake takes its revenge. Maku leaned back, her hands shaking. Her perfect life, the wealth, the gifts, it was all because of a snake spirit? And Aola had been hiding this from her? Before she could ask more questions, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Aola was coming. Beezy quickly went back to peeling yams, her face a mask of calm. Maku stood up, trying to steady herself as Aola entered the kitchen. There you are, my love, he said with a smile. I was looking for you. Maku forced a smile, though her heart was pounding. I was just helping Beezy with breakfast, she said lightly. Aola walked over and gently took her hand. Come, he said. I have a surprise for you. Maku followed him, her mind racing. What kind of surprise? And what was he planning next? Maku followed Aola down the hallway, her hand still in his. His grip was firm but gentle, the way it always was when he wanted her to feel safe. But now, knowing what she did, his touch felt different, colder, almost suffocating. Aola led her to the garden, where a small table was set up under the shade of a large tree. On the table was a box wrapped in shimmering gold paper, tied with a bright red ribbon. For you, Aola said, smiling warmly. Maku hesitated, her heart racing. She forced a smile and opened the box, her fingers trembling. Inside was a pair of emerald earrings, the green stones glittering like the scales of a snake. They match your necklace, Aola said, his eyes fixed on her. Do you like them? Maku nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. They're beautiful, she said softly. Aola leaned closer, his voice low. You've been quiet lately, my love. Is something troubling you? Maku froze. Did he suspect something? She quickly shook her head. No, I'm just tired, she said, trying to sound convincing. Aola studied her for a moment, then smiled again. You deserve to rest. Why don't you take some time for yourself today? I'll handle everything. Maku nodded, grateful for the excuse to be alone. But as Aola walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, even when he wasn't in the room. Later that evening, when the house was quiet and Aola was busy in his study, Maku decided to confront Beezy again. She found the older woman in the servants' quarters, sewing by the dim light of an oil lamp. Beezy, Maku said in a whisper, I need to know more. What kind of sacrifices does the snake demand? Beezy looked up, her face pale. Madam, please, she begged. You don't want to know these things. It's better if you stay quiet and do as the master says. Maku shook her head. No, Beezy. I can't stay quiet. I've already seen too much. Please, tell me the truth. Beezy hesitated, then lowered her voice. The snake doesn't just take animals or objects, madam. Sometimes, it takes people. That is how the master became so wealthy. Aribo showed him the way, and they made the pact together. Maku's chest tightened. People, she whispered. What people? Beezy glanced around, her voice barely audible. Anyone the snake desires. Servants, strangers, sometimes even family. Maku felt like the floor was spinning beneath her feet. She clutched the wall for support. Has it ever taken someone from this house? Beezy's face darkened. Years ago, before you came, there was another woman. The master's first wife. She disappeared one night, and no one saw her again. The servants knew better than to ask questions, but we all suspected the snake. Maku's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair. Aola had been married before? And his first wife, was she one of the sacrifices? Just then, a loud crash echoed from the main hall, followed by the sound of something slithering. Beezy jumped to her feet, her face stricken with fear. It's here, she whispered. The snake. Maku's blood ran cold. She grabbed Beezy's arm. What do we do? But before Beezy could answer, the door creaked open and a shadow fell across the room. Maku's heart pounded as the door creaked open. Standing there was Afolu, his face shadowed in the dim light, but his eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity. Behind him, the faint sound of slithering echoed in the hallway. "You shouldn't be here," Maku, Afolu said, his voice calm but chilling. Maku stood, shielding Beezy behind her. "Why didn't you tell me the truth, Afolu? About the snake? About your first wife?" Afolu's expression hardened. "You wouldn't have understood," he said. "Everything I've done, I did for us. For you to live a life of comfort and happiness." Maku shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You call this happiness? Living in fear of a monster that can take everything away? I don't want this life, Afolu. I want the truth." Afolu sighed, his shoulders slumping. "The truth is simple," he said. "The snake gave me everything I have. But it comes at a price. A price I was willing to pay, until now." Before Maku could respond, Eribo appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. "Afolu," he said urgently, "it's angry. The last offering wasn't enough. It's demanding more." Afolu turned to Eribo, his voice shaking. "I told you I needed more time. I can't." But before he could finish, the sound of slithering grew louder. From the darkness of the hallway emerged the snake. It was massive, its scales glinting like polished emeralds, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The air grew heavy, and Maku felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The snake hissed, its forked tongue flicking in and out. It spoke, its voice a deep, guttural sound that seemed to echo inside their heads. "You have broken the pact, Afolu," it said. "The price must be paid." Afolu fell to his knees, trembling. "Please," he begged. "Give me one more chance. I'll find another offering." The snake's eyes narrowed. "There is no more time," it hissed. "You have grown greedy, and your betrayal cannot be forgiven." Maku stepped forward, her fear replaced by anger. "Why should we live in fear of you?" she shouted. "You may have power, but you only take and destroy. This is not the life anyone should want." The snake turned its gaze to her, its eyes piercing. "You dare to challenge me, mortal?" Maku stood tall, her voice steady. "Yes, because what you offer is not true happiness. Wealth and power built on fear and sacrifice will crumble. I would rather live simply than be bound to your curse." The snake seemed to pause, its gaze shifting between Maku and Afolu. Then it spoke again. "Your courage is rare, human. Very well. The pact is broken, but the price remains." Before anyone could react, the snake lunged toward Afolu. He screamed, but it was over in an instant. The snake coiled around him, and both vanished into the darkness, leaving only silence behind. Eribo stumbled back, his face pale. Without a word, he fled the house, disappearing into the night. Maku stood there, trembling as the weight of what had happened sank in. She turned to Beezy, who placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. In the days that followed, Maku discovered that Afolu's wealth had vanished along with him. The house became quiet, the servants leaving one by one. But Maku felt a strange sense of peace. She had survived the ordeal, and though her life would now be simpler, it would be free of fear and deception. Moral lesson: true happiness cannot be built on greed or deceit. Wealth and power gained at the expense of others will eventually lead to destruction. It is better to live a life of honesty and simplicity than to be enslaved by false promises.